There's a quiet moment most people never notice. It happens in the space between thoughts, in the pause after a question that has no answer yet. That moment is not empty. It is full. From childhood, you were taught to see yourself as separate, a body moving through a world, a mind trapped inside a skull, a voice alone in the noise of billions of others. But separation is not a fact of reality. It is a habit of perception. You feel it when something pulls at you for no logical reason, a sudden knowing, a tension in your chest before words arrive, a decision you can't explain but later realize saved you. These moments are often dismissed as coincidence, but coincidence is just a word we use when we don't understand connection. Look closely at your life, not the big events, but the small, strange alignments. The person you met at the exact wrong or right time, the idea that arrived before the opportunity existed, the path that opened only after you stopped forcing it. You were never moving alone. Modern thinking tells you that reality is solid, mechanical, predictable, that cause comes before effect, that distance separates everything. But reality behaves very differently beneath the surface. At the deepest level, existence is not made of objects. It is made of relationships. What you call matter is interaction. What you call self is a pattern. What you call time is a sequence your mind uses to stay oriented. Underneath it all, there is something else entirely, a field of potential where nothing exists by itself. This is why control has never brought peace, because control assumes separation. It assumes the world is something to be wrestled into shape, but the universe does not respond to force the way we were taught. It responds to alignment. Think about how often your best moments arrived when you stopped trying so hard, when you relaxed, when you trusted without knowing why, when you moved before proof appeared. That wasn't luck. That was coherence. Most people spend their lives broadcasting contradiction. They think one thing, feel another, and act from fear. Their inner signal is fragmented, and fragmented signals don't travel far. But when thought and emotion align, when intention is clear and feeling is honest, something changes. Your presence becomes louder than your words. This is why certain people alter a room without speaking, why some individuals seem protected by invisible timing, why opportunities find those who appear least desperate for them. They are not lucky. They are attuned. You don't attract what you want. You resonate with what you are. This is difficult to accept because it removes excuses. It means your inner state is not private. It is participatory. Every emotion you carry is a vote for a version of reality. Every belief is a filter deciding what you're allowed to notice. Every repeated thought strengthens a pathway you will walk again. You were never powerless. You were just taught to ignore your influence. The world doesn't respond to effort alone. It responds to signal. This is why exhaustion so often produces nothing. And calm clarity can shift everything. The mind was trained to dominate. The heart was trained to stay quiet. But the heart is not weak. It is precise. It senses before logic catches up. It recognizes patterns before language forms. It connects where the mind divides. When you live entirely from the mind, life feels heavy, linear, resistant. But when feeling and intention synchronize, reality begins to bend. Not dramatically at first, subtly. Synchronicities appear, resistance softens. You stop pushing doors that were never meant to open. This is not mystical fantasy. It is how complex systems behave. Nature does not force outcomes. It creates conditions. A seed does not argue with the soil. It aligns with it. You were never meant to command the universe. You were meant to cooperate with it. But cooperation requires trust, and trust requires letting go of certainty. Most people fear this moment because surrender feels like loss. In truth, surrender is accuracy. It is recognizing that the part of you trying to control everything is not the part capable of understanding everything. When you release the demand to know how, your signal becomes clean. When anxiety leaves, clarity arrives, and this is where something unusual happens. You begin to notice that life responds faster, that answers arrive before questions finish forming, that what you need often appears disguised as interruption. The invisible becomes conversational. This does not mean life becomes easy, it becomes intelligent. Challenges still appear, but they carry information now. Pain still exists, but it teaches instead of punishes. Delay still happens, but it redirects instead of denies. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this aligning me with?" This shift changes everything, because once you realize you're connected, isolation becomes impossible. Even in solitude, you're participating. Even in silence, you're transmitting. And here is the truth most people never hear. You're not waiting for life to begin. Life is waiting for you to become coherent, to feel what you think, to think what you feel, to move without inner resistance. When that happens, you don't chase meaning. Meaning finds you. This is not the end of the journey, it is the threshold. Because once you recognize connection, you can no longer live unconsciously. And in the next session, we will explore how this invisible alignment begins to reorganize reality itself through timing, intuition, and the quiet intelligence you were never taught to trust. For now, just sit with this thought. What if your life has never been random, only unread? At some point, awareness stops being comforting. It becomes disruptive. Once you realize that life responds to your inner state, you can no longer unsee it. Patterns reveal themselves, cycles expose their loops, and the excuses that once protected you quietly fall apart. You begin to notice that certain events repeat, not because fate is cruel, but because attention keeps feeding them. The same conflicts, the same emotional traps, the same endings wearing different faces. This is where most people turn back, because awareness demands responsibility. Not blame, but ownership. It becomes impossible to say, "This just happens to me," when you start noticing how your inner posture shapes your outer experiences. Reality does not punish you. It mirrors you. And mirrors are uncomfortable when you expect windows. The invisible connection we explored earlier does not wait for permission. It is already operating. Every moment, your nervous system is scanning the environment, not just for danger, but for meaning. Your beliefs decide what counts as relevant. Your emotions decide what gets amplified. Your identity decides what feels possible. This is why two people can live in the same world and experience entirely different realities. One sees threat, the other sees information. One feels blocked, the other feels redirected. One waits for permission, the other recognizes timing. Nothing external changed, only interpretation did, and interpretation is not passive, it is creative. Most people assume intuition is rare, something mystical that happens to special individuals. In truth, intuition is constant. What's rare is listening. Intuition doesn't shout, it nudges. It speaks in bodily sensations before language arrives. A tightness, a pull, a sudden stillness. But the modern mind is trained to override it, to demand evidence before movement, to delay action until certainty arrives. The problem is, certainty only comes after alignment, not before. You don't feel ready, then act. You act, then coherence forms. This is why so many people feel stuck. They are waiting for internal permission that only motion provides. When you begin to trust these subtle signals, something strange happens. Timing improves. You arrive moments before something matters. You avoid situations you later realize would have cost you. You speak to the right person without knowing why. From the outside, it looks like luck. From the inside, it feels like flow. But flow has a cost. You can't force it, and you can't fake it. The moment you try to control outcomes again, resistance returns. The signal distorts. Noise replaces clarity. This is where fear re-enters. Fear does not stop connection. It hijacks it. When fear dominates, your attention narrows. You begin scanning only for threat, loss, or validation. Your inner signal collapses inward, and reality responds accordingly. Opportunities shrink, options disappear. The world feels hostile, not because it changed, but because your bandwidth did. Fear makes the universe feel worse, small. This is why chronic anxiety feels suffocating. It is not just emotional, it is perceptual. You are still connected, but only to a narrow slice of possibility. And then doubt arrives. Doubt is quieter than fear, more subtle, more dangerous. Fear says, this will go wrong. Doubt says, this probably won't work. Doubt weakens intention just enough to keep you stuck, but not enough to feel dramatic. It creates endless preparation without movement, endless learning without application. You become informed, but unchanged. The invisible connection responds poorly to hesitation, not because it punishes, but because it amplifies consistency. Mixed signals create static. This is why clarity feels powerful, even when the decision is imperfect. Clarity creates momentum. Momentum reorganizes reality. This doesn't mean reckless action, it means honest alignment. When you act in accordance with what you actually feel, not what you think you should feel, your signal strengthens, and with it, synchronicity increases. Synchronicity is not magic, it is feedback. It is reality saying, yes, this direction carries coherence. The more you notice these signals, the louder they become. Not because the universe changes, but because your attention does. Gratitude plays a strange role here. Not forced gratitude, not positivity as denial, but recognition. When you acknowledge alignment, it stabilizes. When you dismiss it, it fades. Gratitude says, I see the pattern, and what is seen persists. This is why people who constantly feel unlucky often are, not because life hates them, but because they ignore reinforcement. The mind learns through repetition. So does reality. If you only acknowledge failure, you train attention to find more. If you notice alignment, even small, you strengthen the channel. Small acknowledgements compound. A moment of calm, a helpful delay, a conversation that lands. These are not trivial. They are confirmations. And here is the unsettling part. Once this awareness stabilizes, you can no longer pretend ignorance. You start feeling the cost of misalignment immediately. Forcing relationships feels heavier. Ignoring intuition feels painful. Living against yourself creates friction you can't numb anymore. But this discomfort is not punishment. It is guidance. You are being taught to listen. At this stage, many people feel lost, not because direction disappeared, but because false paths stopped working. Old motivations collapse. External validation loses its pull. You feel suspended between identities. This is not confusion. It is recalibration. You are shedding an outdated signal, and shedding is quiet, lonely, often misunderstood. Others may not recognize the shift. They may resist it. They may pressure you to return to who you were, but you can't unknow what you now feel. Once awareness reaches this depth, life stops asking for effort. and starts asking for honesty. Who are you when no one is watching? What do you do when certainty is unavailable? What direction feels lighter? Not easier, but truer. These questions don't need answers. They need attention, and attention is enough to reshape trajectory. In the final session, we will explore what happens when this alignment becomes stable, when identity reorganizes, when effort transforms into precision, and when you stop chasing meaning because meaning begins to move through you. If this session resonated with you, subscribe to the channel. What comes next builds on everything you've just recognized, and it only works if you continue the journey. There is a moment when the search ends, not because you found all the answers, but because the questions stopped controlling you. By now, something should feel different, not dramatic, not explosive, quieter. You may have noticed that your reactions softened, that urgency lost its grip, that you no longer feel the same need to explain yourself to yourself or anyone else. This is not apathy, it is precision. When alignment stabilizes, identity reorganizes, you stop trying to become someone. You start operating as yourself, and this is where most philosophies fail because they promise transformation without consequence. But real change costs something. It costs the version of you that survived by tension, by overthinking, by staying alert for threats that no longer exist. That version doesn't disappear peacefully, it resists. Because it believes control kept you safe, but safety and truth are not the same thing. The moment you stop forcing outcomes, something unsettling happens. You realize how much energy you were wasting on mental rehearsal, on imagined conversations, on defending identities that were never questioned. That energy returns, not as excitement, but as capacity. You can now sit with uncertainty without panic. You can act without guarantees. You can wait without fear of missing out. This is when the invisible connection becomes embodied, not conceptual. You no longer think about alignment. You feel when something is off, a subtle tension, a loss of rhythm, a sense of contraction, and instead of pushing through it, you pause. This pause is power, because most people live reactively. They respond to stimuli before awareness arrives. They mistake speed for intelligence. But intelligence is not fast, it is accurate. When you operate from coherence, action becomes economical. Nothing extra, nothing wasted. You speak less, but with weight. You choose fewer paths, but commit fully. You stop proving and start positioning. Others may not understand this shift. They may interpret it as distance, or arrogance, or withdrawal, but what they're sensing is internal order. Order unsettles those who rely on chaos to feel alive. As alignment deepens, the world begins to respond differently. Not louder, clearer. Obstacles don't vanish. They reveal their purpose faster. You start seeing why certain things never worked. Why certain doors stayed closed no matter how hard you pushed. Why certain delays protected you from outcomes you weren't ready to carry. Nothing was random. The invisible network you're entangled with was always guiding, not obstructing. And here is the most important realization of all. You don't manifest by wanting, you manifest by becoming. Reality doesn't respond to desire, it responds to identity. Who you believe you are decides what feels natural to receive, what feels meant for you, what you unconsciously allow. This is why some people self-sabotage right before breakthroughs, not because they're weak, but because success conflicts with identity. Alignment requires updating the self-image. You don't ask, can this happen? You ask, who would I be if it already had? And then you act from that posture, not theatrically, but subtly. Your decisions change tone. Your standards adjust. Your tolerance for misalignment drops. You stop negotiating with what drains you. This doesn't make life smaller, it makes it sharper. And sharpness is often mistaken for hardness, but it's actually clarity. At this stage, intuition is no longer occasional. It becomes background intelligence. You know when to speak. You know when to wait. You know when something is finished, even if it hasn't ended yet. This knowing doesn't come with emotion. It comes with stillness, and stillness is misunderstood. People assume stillness is passivity, but stillness is readiness without agitation. It is awareness without urgency. This is why the most impactful shifts happen quietly. No announcement, no dramatic declaration, just a series of decisions that feel irreversible. You no longer chase validation. You no longer fear solitude. You no longer rush connection, because connection is no longer external. You feel held, not by belief, but by coherence. And this is the paradox few are prepared for. When you stop needing the universe to prove itself to you, it starts responding faster than ever. Not because you demanded, but because you listened. Not because you asked, but because you aligned. The invisible has always been responsive. You just weren't speaking its language. That language is not words, it is state, and now you understand it. So here is the final question. Not rhetorical, but practical. What part of your life still requires force? That is where alignment is incomplete. And what part feels calm, clear, and inevitable? That is where the signal is strongest. You don't need to change everything. You only need to stop resisting what's already reorganizing. If this journey reached something deep in you, comment below with the words, "I see the pattern," not for anyone else, but as a signal to yourself. Because once you see it, you can't pretend you don't. And the quiet truth is this: you were never disconnected. You were just distracted now. You're awake.